September 2018, Scarlett published a wonderful book entitled Waking Up to Love, Our Shared Near-Death Encounter Brought Miracles, Recovery, and Second Chances. The book was dedicated by Scarlett and David, her husband. And they said to their mothers, whom they dedicated it to, "Thank you for giving us life and love, and for being the light workers you are. Both of you are amazing healers." And that's how the book was opened. Scarlett and David come from Richmond. She has a PhD in Public Policy Administration from VCU and a Master's in Health from VCU School of Medicine. She also has studied complementary and alternative and integrative medicine for over 25 years. She is a Reiki master on natural healing, originated in Japan years ago, with a focus on balancing the mind and cleansing the self. She is well known as an energy practitioner and an intuitive consultant. Scarlett also has worked in financial services and held a banking and brokerage positions with Fortune 500 companies for more than 15 years. And at that time, she became known for her pioneering work in the care of women and money. Listen, ladies. Women and money, especially in personal attitudes, behavior, and retirement planning. In September 2005, Scarlett first met David, her husband, who was near death and in a coma, an unresponsive coma. And he stayed that way for nearly 4 weeks. And after this, and during the next 12 days, Scarlett immersed herself in energy healing with David. And the result was miraculous. David started to get well, and he survived. And although not entirely explainable, Scarlett began to trigger her training and background into a myriad of thoughts and other questions. There was a definite connection between Scarlett and David. A connection while he was so sick. They appeared to be communicating with each other. How in the world could this be? How was it possible to send and receive to each other messages about feelings of pain, hope, and faith? Scarlett and David fell deeply in love during this time, and they have bonded themselves to each other for life. It was compelling for Scarlett to learn also what had really taken place. Not everything was just automatic in what she was doing or knowing. Do we have inexplainable energy hidden away within us? Do we have an extreme will to live Is the brain more powerful than we realize? Can the mind and body tap into hidden forces that just lie beyond our grasp? These are some of the things that I'm sure Scarlett thought about. This remarkable encounter, though not entirely explainable, yearns for many of us to raise questions about life in the body and out of the body, and having a shared experience at falling in love with a desire to pursue a future together. The encounter. Does it really work? How is it possible? Thanks to Scarlett and David's love, there is a curiosity and penchant for learning, I should say, about who we are and what makes us tick. In the book, Scarlett raises the question as to what God is asking us to do without necessarily seeing the end. And she mentions that there are some powers we may not be able to understand, including those with no religion. But Scarlett wrote her book because she had to do what she felt was God's work. Scarlett and David have been in the show with William Shatner, The Unexplained, witnessed by scientists and historians and other experiencers. Those things about death, seeking explanation about faith and power of the unknown. They also have been invited to be interviewed at CBS News, and they are speaking at the 2019 National Convention in Ions, the King of Prussia in Pennsylvania. And have you already been there to that, or is that's already happened? Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Dr. Scarlett Heinbuch.
Thank you, everybody. Everyone hear me okay? Wayne, thank you. That was beautiful. Really, really beautiful. And it actually brought a tear to my eye to hear you telling my story in a way that, from your perspective, because even though it happened to me, it still leaves me with so many questions. And today, that's really what I want to talk about, these questions. But the book is Waking Up to Love because this is a story about love. It's about the love that you experience on the other side that just about every NDE talks about. And it's also an unusual love story. And it's a shared near-death experience. And there's a couple things I'm going to start off with first. I know we have some nurses in the room, right? I think, show of hands. How many nurses? Well, my mother's a retired nurse. And so I love nurses. They're very dear to my heart. And so I want to talk about that too. But I also want to say that this month, this day, this is the 14th year anniversary of the time that I went to David's hospital room, which happened on September 23rd, 2005. So we're looking at that 14 years, and in 14 years, a lot has changed, including me, and including him, and including our understanding. As you all know, if you've had it, how many people have had an NDE in this room? Okay. So most of you know that as it goes by, Dave and I never spoke publicly about what had happened to us for 10 years. We didn't have words to even begin to explain everything that had happened because it's a process. And some of it was so unbelievable. As Wayne pointed out, I'm a scientist by training. I'm a PhDer. I just a PhDer like that. But I'm a scientist. I'm a researcher. I'm very logical, and I wanted to be able to find an understanding of this that I could make sense with my rational mind. And yet I'm also an experiencer. And something happened, it's not in my book, and this is fairly recent. I want to share this with you because I think it provides a very important context. My mother and I were having a conversation recently, and I said to her that I kept having this memory popping up of me being in the bottom of a swimming pool, just gone, and floating in this place of peace and love. And I said, Mom, I don't know why I'm having this memory. Is this true? Did this happen? And she said, well, yes, it did. She said, you were 4, and we were in a swimming pool in the apartment complex where we were living. My sister and I were in the pool, and my brother, who was 18 months old, was in a wading pool. And Mom said that she had turned her eyes. My sister and I were in the shallow end, and she turned her eyes to look at my brother, who was in the wading pool, and when she looked back, she didn't see me. And the pool had a lifeguard and things like that, but she didn't see me. And then she said she panicked. She got up, she looked, and back in the days, you know, you wear these little pink little caps that stuck to your head and like peeled off like rubber and tore your hair with it. It was a lot of fun. But anyway, she saw me in the bottom of the pool and saw the pink cap. So she dived in and got me. And what had happened was I had been on the shallow end, but the pools would slope down to the deeper end. And I guess I was bobbing along, and then my feet no longer hit the bottom. And I began to gulp water, and I drowned. So she pulled me out, and being a nurse, she was able to revive me. And I remember floating in peace and love, just being so happy. And I also remember feeling her feelings and her panic and her fear. And I came back. And so from that time on, at 4 years old, I had a near-death experience. But here I am, 50-some years later, I had not processed it. I did not realize at that point that had set me up for all the experiences that happened later of being what we call very psychic as a child, having all these experiences with people who've passed on, not having a framework of understanding that wasn't normal until I got older. Well, we were at the IANS conference a few weeks ago in King of Prussia, and most people in the NDE community have heard of PMH Atwater. She's been a researcher for years and years. She's just come out with a new book about children who had near-death experiences prior to the age of 5. And she explains that this is a normal, they have these experiences and alters them for life, and they don't even know it. And something has happened in my understanding and awareness of all of this that has helped me to really grasp how deep this is and how I was able to now have an understanding of how I was able to help David. So I want to now get into that. And also, because this is a small group, I really would like to make it interactive. So if you have questions, I'd rather just answer them, you know, rather than just talk at you. And the room's warm. If you go to sleep, you know, I don't want to bore you to death. So I'd like to hear, you know, if you do have some questions, just raise your hand and let me know. And we'll go from there. Does that sound good? All right. Well, there's a lot to talk about, but basically what happened 14 years ago was, and I'm honest about this in the book, I went through a real tough time. I was in my PhD program. I had 2 sons with disabilities. One had severe ADHD and was in special ed. My other son had epilepsy. It destroyed my previous marriage, and I was a single mom trying to figure out how to help my children. That is also what got me started on learning about alternative healing to soothe them and to help them along because they were hurting. And so I was in a tough place in my life, and I felt like I was drinking too much wine, and I talk about that too. I had grown up, my dad had a drinking problem, so I was aware of the things to look out for. So I took myself to an AA meeting because I was scared. And I wasn't sure if that was exactly what fit for me, but I knew that drinking wasn't my friend, and I needed to stop. So I did. But I stopped going to AA. I was busy with my PhD program in public policy. At that time, I was looking into health policy to help kids. And as time went on, I had friends who had remained in the program, and so they knew David. Now, I never met David because I'd stopped going to meetings, but they were telling me about him and how sick he was getting, and that he was, having all these problems with headaches. A lot of that folks knew about the healing work I had done and continued to do, and so they were telling me, and I'm thinking, well, I don't know this guy. There's nothing much I can do about that, because I've never worked with anyone that critically ill. But we have nurses in the room, so I'll talk a little bit about that too. So time went on, and David ended up going into the hospital thinking he was having a panic attack. This was in Richmond, Virginia at St. Mary's Hospital. And those nurses and clinicians are saints, by the way, and I dedicate the book also to them. But David ended up in the ER because he couldn't breathe. He didn't know that his lungs were shutting down, and that's what happened. He got to the hospital, they admitted him, and the next day he was in a full respiratory arrest and on life support. And then his kidneys shut down. Then he had blood clots. Then he had double pneumonia. Then he had sepsis, and it just got worse from there. They gave him heparin for the blood clots, and he had an allergic reaction to that. So at that point, his mother, who was in San Francisco, had been called out. 3.5 weeks went by. It took about 10 or more consults for them to even find out that he had what was called Wegener's granulomatosis, a very rare form of vasculitis that affects maybe about 500 people annually, and no one really knows why. It could be bacterial, no one knows, but it used to be deadly, and now it's treated similar to cancer, but it's devastating. Most people who do have it end up with organ destruction, and most people who have organ destruction, the kidneys, as you know, do not return. They do not regenerate. It's not unusual, nurses know too, that if someone has, the kidneys can shut down when people are sick and they can come right back, but that's a different thing from organ destruction. So 3.5 weeks into this, David's mother gets a call to come say goodbye. She hops the plane that day, and I end up meeting her at a meeting that night in AA in Richmond, where I had gone to support a friend who was celebrating 20 years. So I knew that people I knew David, and they were standing around crying because he'd taken the downturn, and they said he wasn't getting enough oxygen, and now his brain was at risk, and had, and they were saying everything was shutting down at that point. And so his mother said that she had signed the funeral directives that day, and they didn't expect him to make it through the night. So at the end of it, and I'm sure all of you had this moment where you're thinking you're going to say something, but something that comes out of your mouth is completely different. So what I was going to say to her was, I went up to her, she touched my heart, and I said, I was going to say, I'm really sorry, but what came out of my mouth was, I don't think you should give up hope yet. Now she looked at me like, kind of puzzled, like, do you not hear what I'm saying? And I said, I don't, I told her, I said that I do some energy healing, and that if nothing else, if she wanted me to go to the hospital, hold his hand and pray with him, and just be with him if he's going to cross over, I would be willing to do that if she wanted me to. And I said, I just know that this is really hard for everybody. And I do some energy work. Being from California, she was a little open to that. And she said, well, he's Jewish. And I said, that's fine. We had a joke. I said, years later, I said, were you worried I was going to press a cross in his chest? Don't worry, I wasn't going to do that. And I said, energy work is totally respectful of anyone's religion, or even if they don't have one, it doesn't matter. We're working with the body's spiritual energy field. And and I said, look, I can't promise a thing, but if you want me to go, and you'll have to give me permission, but I will. And again, the big question mark was, would David even be alive the next day? During this time, like I said, I was a single mom. I was teaching as a graduate teaching assistant in criminal justice at VCU. I'd finished all my coursework, and I was in dissertation spin. And I was also teaching a marriage and family relationships class as an adjunct. So I was broke. I barely had money to even put gas in my car, but I just knew there was something compelling me to go see David. And like I said, I didn't know him. And my mind, again, I have this logical mind, so my mind's always going with, why? What can you do for this person? Why would you even go there? You don't know him. He's so far gone. He's not going to make it. Why are you doing this? And just like the words that came out of my mouth that I couldn't explain, the same feeling was, you need to go. So I had to listen to that. So I went. And I have never seen anyone in acute kidney failure before, and I didn't know that their whole bodies are bloated up. And I didn't know, I'd never met David, so I didn't even know what he looked like, but even if I had, I wouldn't have recognized him because his whole body was bloated up. He had the feeding tube in because he'd been comatose for, at that point, 3.5 weeks. He had the ventilator going. He had a central line in. He had the IV lines. He had the pulse oximeter. He had the catheter bag, which was bone dry. And it was even, I remember looking at it and seeing it was like collapsed in on itself. There's nothing. And it was like, it was just devastating. There was absolutely no energy. And I later found out, a friend of mine who did Reiki had gone to the hospital, and she said the only energy she felt was from the machines, and she was so freaked out she left. And she said he was gone. And so when I walked in his room, I always remember what my mother said. When someone's in a coma, you talk to them like they're awake because they can hear what you say even if you don't think they can. So I introduced myself to David. I just told him who I was. I pretended that in my mind he was awake and said I was here because a lot of people loved him and that I was here to help him in any way that he might like, and that if he wanted me to, he would have to give me permission to do some work with him if he chose. But if he didn't, that was okay too. And I told him, I know you can't say the words out loud or speak, but if you want me to work with you, I'm just going to wait and I'll listen for how you can talk to me. And so I stood there for a moment and I felt a little whoosh of air. I also should say he was also in the cardiac intensive care unit because also his heart was out of rhythm too. So we later found and have been told that any one of those things he could have died from. And the combination, we've been told repeatedly, it's generally not survivable. So the fact that David was still alive at that point was, to me, because of the loving hands and help that he'd gotten from the staff at St. Mary's. He wouldn't be here today if they hadn't done what they had done to keep him alive. So I felt that whoosh of air, and I realized he was giving me some permission, and I began to work with him, doing some energy. And the nurses were very cautious. One nurse put her chair right outside the room, like she's going to sit there. She's not going to, intrude on the time, but she's letting me know she's keeping an eye on things. Here's this crazy lady around waving her hands over this very sick man. And I guess they wanted to make sure that I didn't unplug anything or pull anything, and being in that setting, I'm trying to be careful to not dislodge anything. But I first started with a prayer, and that's what I always did, because one of the things I've learned is I don't know what anyone's soul plan is. It's really between them and the God of their understanding. And I did not know if David's soul plan was for him to pass on. I didn't know. But I did know whatever he chose, it was going to be okay. What I was not prepared for was when I took his hand and I said my prayer. My prayer was always for the highest and best, most sacred and holy energy under God's hand in this dimension and any other. And that's going to become important in just a minute. Because I don't limit God. I know we've got, billions of galaxies, trillions of galaxies. We're just one small galaxy. So I can't even comprehend how huge that hand is. But I know that it is so huge, and I've felt it. So I felt it, and I took his hand, and as I did, I began to feel my heart open, and I began to feel that flood of compassion and sorrow, and I began to feel his pain. I felt his feelings, and I was feeling, and David is fine with me saying this, I was feeling his shame, his regrets, and that just brought such compassion to me, because I was like, oh, like seeing somebody that you haven't seen in a long time in a very bad way, and you're just so sorry to see him that way, and that's how it felt to me. And yet I was feeling what he was feeling. I was like, oh, no, you are so loved. You've got to know how loved you are, that there is nothing you could have ever done that you are not loved. And that's why I told him, I said, David, whatever you want to do is okay. You're loved, but you've got to, if you're going to go, then go knowing you are completely loved. But if you feel like you have some unfinished business and you decide that you want to stick around, I don't even know why I'm telling you this, but I'll keep coming back if you want me to. So I did my waving of hands. I didn't feel much response. Do we have any energy workers in the room? Okay, so you know that you usually feel someone's response or something from somebody, but there was really nothing. And as I finished, I took his hand again to do a closing prayer, and as I was getting ready to leave, I reiterated my promise that I'd come back if he decided he wanted to stay. And as I was getting ready to take my hand away, all of a sudden I realized it was fused to his, and I couldn't pull it away. Now, I mean, if I yanked hard, I could have, but he had no grip, so he wasn't gripping my hand. It was as though his spirit was reaching back, and that's when I realized, you know, he's reaching back. So, but I knew he wasn't even in his body mostly while I was working with him, and I knew that he was pretty much gone. And I honestly did not know even then what he was going to decide to do. That night, I went home, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I felt David's presence in my room. My first thought was that he had passed on, and that he was just saying thanks, bye, and that was it. And I got up and called the hospital, and he was still there. So I continued to work with him over 12 days, and spoiler alert, he lived. But what happened during that 12-day period, today it's still hard to talk about. It took me 13 years to write the book, and a lot I didn't even want to put in there. And I finally had to say, you got to be honest, you have to tell the truth, come what may. So that's what I did, and that's why I was honest about going to AA, honest that I was worried about my drinking problem, honest that about what had happened. So during those days that I worked with David, the energy began to improve. In just a few days, he began to produce a little bit of urine. Now, even with destruction, there can be some comeback, you know, even if it's not complete, you know, 25 or 30% recovery of kidneys can occur. So I thought, well, that's a hopeful sign. As I continued to work with David, he still had not regained consciousness, but what had happened was this day I walked in his room and I said my prayer and I'm holding his hand, but then I wasn't there at the bedside. I was in another plane of dimension. And that's when I realized I was out of my body. I didn't even realize it. I'm just experiencing at the moment. It's later when I processed what happened. But I was out of my body, and I was in this field of love, like you can't even describe it. I call it every kind of love, because you know you have love for a parent, child, lover, friend, all kinds of love. But this was all the kind of love that you cannot even describe. It's not romantic. It's just everything. It's love. It's just pure pulsing energy love, and it was light. And when I talk about light, I mean it was like little dots, billions, and I can't even describe it. It's just like lights and lights and lights, tons of lights, and I'm in this light space. And I called it liquid love, but it's not wet. I don't have the words to describe the chemistry or what I perceived of. It's just that I knew that this energy, this love, is what we're all made of. It breathed me, I was breathing it. We were just it together. And as my perceptions became even stronger, I realized at the bedside I was still holding David's hand. And I recognized in this space I was holding another hand, and that's when I saw David. That's where I met David, in that space. Because again, he'd been unconscious the whole time that I'd been working with him. So I met him there, and that's when my whole heart opened, and I knew I love this person. And I had no reason to, why? How could I possibly, I mean, I loved this person, and my soul knew him and felt that I had always known him. And I didn't even know what to make. I just knew. I just knew. And as healers and clinicians, you all know you don't get attached to your patients. You don't get attached to your outcomes because it's out of your hands. But when I plop back to my body and I'm standing there looking at David still unconscious, and I'm wondering what happened here, and recognizing there's this huge love connection, then I wanted him to live. At that point, I was like, well, whatever, you know, it's in God's hands. But I wanted him to live at that point. So I continued working with him, not sure what was going on. And then we had another experience, and this is where it gets a little weird. And I was at home, and I saw that I couldn't remember now if it was like a waking dream or whatever, but I saw myself in his hospital room, and I saw these 4 beings, and they were colored blue, and they looked like a medical team. I call them the doctors. And there were one at each, the foot, the head, and each side. And one of them had like his kidney, like a set of kidneys, and they looked blue. Everything was blue. And they dropped those, I saw those kidneys descend into his body. And I thought, well, that's odd. And then I thought, well, I'm just either tired or whatever, you know, the mind goes. So I continued looking at, observing what was going on, and then I called him the lead doctor. He looked up. It's like he saw me, my spirit or my energy, and he nodded his head like, we've got this. And then I thought, well, okay, and then I went on to sleep. The next day I go to the hospital, and I took tuning forks in to kind of calibrate the frequencies. I used a lot of things in my healing work, including aromatherapy, oils, tuning forks, music, all sorts of things. And when I went back in, and David's kidneys had begun to function, and the doctors and nurses started calling him Miracle Boy. The next day after that, he woke up. And then we continued really working, and the energy started flying and flowing in ways I had never, ever experienced before. It was like it was flowing in and out of us, and it was so powerful, and I had never encountered anything like that in all my years of doing different types of energy work. And so by the 12th day, David was fully conscious. He was able to drink a little water, have a little applesauce, and I told him, I said, you're going to be up on your feet the next day. And I was like, well, you know, when a patient's been down that long, that generally is not going to happen. But he was. He stood up after 12 days. And he made what they said is a miraculous recovery. Each day, the nephrologist would come in and report how the kidney function was coming back up, coming back up, coming back up, coming back up to 100%. He said, I've never seen this. I don't know how. I don't know what happened, but they called him Miracle Boy. So that's what happened. And his lung had also collapsed. I don't know if I told you that too. So he had the chest tube in too. So, I mean, his breathing began to get better, but he still needed breathing treatment. So they were able to discontinue the dialysis. So David made this stunning recovery, and then they put him in a step-down unit, and he was still having some blood clots, and they said they were going to discharge him to Sheltering Arms, which is a rehab facility. So I went in to work with him again. Now he's conscious. And you talk about awkward. It was awkward because he was a stranger. I don't know him in life. We'd never met until he woke up, and then, hi, I'm Scarlett. Nice to meet you. And here you're having this intense experience and this love and all this stuff happening, and he's still shaky from everything. He's lost what, how much? 35 pounds, 40 pounds, at least, from the feeding tube and being so deathly sick. He doesn't know what's happening. I mean, he goes in, it's still summer, and he wakes up and the leaves are falling off the tree. And he didn't even know what had happened. So he's got all this to deal with. And he said, and I'll tell you this, David, and I've talked about this, he doesn't have the conscious memory of meeting me, but he has the soul memory. And what happened was, he said he opened his eyes and saw me, and he knew he was instantly in love. He knew everything about me. He said he knew he was going to marry me, and he didn't know how that was going to be because life was a little complicated for us both at that time. So I thought, well, I was teaching the marriage and family relationships class, and I said, well, he's not on my checklist for anything. He's near death. He's getting ready to be newly divorced. All of these things were going on. Everything I was telling my students were, nah, you don't want that. No, and, all of it. So, but God had another plan. So David got well. And his journey of recovery still took quite a bit of time to get his breath back and things like that. But he continued to improve, and then he went out to visit his mother in San Francisco. At the time, David was still married, and we didn't know what was going on with all that. And I was just praying for his highest and best, whatever that was, because, again, I didn't know. And he came back and said, well, I'm here, and I'm here. And he's like, kiss me. And let's go from there. So we kind of did, and that was 14 years ago, and we have been together ever since, learning and growing and struggling. I'm not going to say that it's been easy, but what I do have learned from this experience is about love. And love is not just easy. It's not. It's going to challenge you on every level, and that is what has happened. I left my corporate job last year after the book was published. I couldn't do it anymore. Even though I have learned how to walk in two worlds of being in that love space and having this knowing that I've always had, I'm a respecter of science, and I always want evidence. I want to understand. And there are some things that you can't understand, and there are some things that you can never explain because we don't have words in this human form. And I said, if there's a creation and a force that creates these billions or trillions of galaxies, how in the world can we possibly, in our very limited little way, explain even the little glimpse that we see? And it's individual. We're only going to see it through our own eyes and how we can explain it and understand it from the lens of how we've lived. So my dedication had always been to help other people in any way I could. As a woman, I had seen a lot of women suffering financially. That's a form, and I was trying to integrate all this. How does money tie in? How does healing tie in? How does love tie in? How do relationships tie in? And I recognize that we have these etheric, loving things, but we are still in these human systems, right? Economics is a system. How are we going to work within it and survive and be loving beings when you've got a light bill pressing you and you don't have the cash in your account? Or if you don't have been through, I was studying women in prime time years, and that's women over 55. Women who have been around the block in life, and I was looking at that, and I was approaching that. I was 45 when I met David. As a single mom, I was broke and stressed, and again, kids with disabilities are expensive. And so this was my question: how am I going to survive? How am I going to do all these things? And so that's why I studied that too, because it's all related. Money is energy, right? Spirituality is energy. It's all related. And so I had to learn some of these lessons around that money and that energy and how I was thinking about it or not thinking about it, or how I was being mindful. And I recognized that every thought I had about money was also pursuant to how I thought about relationships. How was I doing that energy exchange? Was it healthy for me? Was I being protective of myself? Because my nature is just give, give, give till there's nothing left. And as women, we're often conditioned. And when you have family members that need a lot of caregiving, that's your whole mindset. You're not even thinking about what you are taking care of yourself when you need to take care of others. So these were huge lessons I had to learn. And I had such compassion. I talked to women who would ask for some healing work, and then they'd say, well, I can't really pay much, and I'm broke. And I'm looking at that, and I thought, well, that's okay. And then we'd talk, and we'd say, well, what's going on about money? Because, we'd have these discussions, and then say, how about taking care of you? What if you need to buy some supplements or something that might be helpful, or you might need to consider some other way of looking at your health and your needs? And I found a lot of women, too, who had been hurt in life. Who isn't, right? I mean, this life is not easy, period. I don't care who you are. There's nobody who hasn't, in this room and elsewhere, who hasn't got some burden on their heart that they're carrying today, some major loss, some major pain, some major heartache that is there. We all do. That's part of the human condition. And part of what I was learning was, how can you provide love and healing and support for people who are suffering in so many different ways? And we tend to isolate our suffering and say, well, it's a money issue, it's a health issue, it's a love issue, it's a kid issue, it's a parent issue, it's a job issue, it's a bad boss issue. And it may show up all those ways, but really what it's about is the relationship to yourself and to love. And I know it's hard sometimes to explain it, but that's what I have come to understand. And I'm going to be honest, I walked away from a 6-figure job. I was grateful to have that job, but my real job was bringing love to people. The people that reported to me, my job was never to be their boss. My job was to be their support. How can I help them be successful? How can I help them to find peace in their life? How can I help them to be promoted? How can I help them? And so establishing those rapport and that rapport with people, and just letting them know that I was in their corner, was such a shock to people in the corporate world. They said, we've never had a boss like this. Well, what do we do with that? I said, how about just know I'm here for you. We ended up having the highest morale scores, the highest performing team, tripling the business, all of these things. And people were saying, well, so what are you doing? And I said, I'm just loving these folks. I'm showing them respect. I'm showing them care. I'm letting them know I'm in their corner. And that's the most important thing to me. And then corporate world being corporate world, well, they just go back to that. I'm the outlier in the corporate world, but I was like, well, I have to keep my integrity too, and I'm very picky about this, but I think people should be rewarded for the work that they do. And so if you tell me as a manager that someone else's bonus is more important than my employees, like a manager's, and let's take people's performance standards down, I'm going to say no, I will not do that. I will not do that. That's not ethical. So, you know, so I had some hard lessons about ethics and my own personal values balanced with my own personal needs of having a paycheck. And in the end, I said, and I love this, my father-in-law, David's dad, is just such a font of wisdom, and I was talking to him about these issues, and he said, well, you know, this isn't your employer, God's your employer, so you need to have some faith, and you do what's right in your heart. And so that's what I did. I quit the job, and I walked away, and I'm not going to kid you and say we don't miss having that money, because, you know, you don't make much on books, let's be honest here. But it's a leap of faith. And walking into David's room was a leap of faith. Everything I have done has been a leap of faith. And that's why I'm here today, to remind you that whatever is going on in your life, every one of you, you're loved. You are loved in a way that is unfathomable. And if you could focus on that love, the rest of it really does take care of itself. And that love means also knowing that if you are a child of that love, which I call it, I just call it the love, because I don't know any word for it. People can call it God, you can call it whatever you want. To me, it is love. You don't hurt people you love. And nobody needs to be hurt. And that's just it. We're all hurting in some way. But I found, and this is why I tell people all the time, the healer is love. And that's the work I'm doing today, is I am activating. I'm not the fixer. I'm not the healer. What I am is the healing facilitator, and that's what I told David. I never healed David. What I did was open the doorway to love for him so that his own healing took over and his own relationship with that divine power took over. And then again, those beings, these dimensions, I was terrified to even say about that, as though everything else that happened wasn't crazy enough. Talk about blue beings, oh, well, that's just off the top, right? Well, when we spoke at IANS for the first time in 2015, again, that was the 10-year anniversary, and they said a couple things that really hit home. One is it takes about 10 years to process a near-death experience, and I think that's true. I know it's taken me a lifetime to process and even recall my own at such a young age. But they said another thing, when we talked about the blue beings, people stood up and said, we've been hearing about this all over the world. We met a man from Hungary who talked about his near-death experience where he was clinically dead for 9 minutes. It's documented. And he also saw the blue beings, and they helped him, and they were love. And he talks about that. And we were invited to speak in Hungary last year as part of that group. So we went, and this man has decided that he would share his story more fully with me because I had been asked to write a book about these blue beings. And in doing that research, finding out that Native Americans have talked about the sky people, the star people, this is not new. Every culture has talked about these beings, and even different shades, different colors, and blue is not unusual. So, but I didn't know that. So as I've been going into this research and finding out all over the world, the research for me is like, well, what are the common denominators? How did this happen? Why David? Why did David have this experience? Can other people have it? Is this a normal thing? Is there a way, when you're opening those portals, if you will, to other dimensions under this creative world, are there ways that you can access these dimensions to help everybody? So that's been my real question. How can I help the most people by sharing information? It's not for me to go be a healer these days, although I've had a lot of requests to help people. We were on the show The Unexplained, and it aired August 23rd, right? And I'll tell you, they interviewed us for 5 hours, and it ended up being a 3-minute clip. And they focused on, of course, the most sensational things, and I will be the first to tell you that they said something that was not correct. They said David's mother reached out to me, who claimed that I claimed to be an incredible healer. No, I am so humble. It's not me doing the work. I'm just hands and feet on the ground. So I was cringing on the couch on that one. I was like, oh no. And of course the blue beings, because it's TV, right? They're gonna, but I will give them credit. They asked to see David's medical records. They verified that this was indeed unexplained, what had happened, and they ran it by their medical consults, because I said you need to do that, you know. But that's why I said, I think what is incredible is God's healing ability. I think we all have it. And one of the things that I want to do with the rest of my life, and that's been my commitment, is to help people find that own inner healer, to awaken it within, and share what I have learned. So these days, what I'm doing is working on, I ended up getting hundreds and hundreds of calls, emails, messages, and just the past few weeks I've been so overwhelmed, and people are so desperate, and it just breaks my heart when people have just written their whole life story to me, and it's just, so I just pray for all of them. I reached out to a few people if I feel guided to do that, and people want the blue beings to show up, and I said, well, you know, it's not push button. It's not like I can just say, okay, blue beings, go replace that kidney, organ, or heart, or whatnot. I can't do that. I'm not powerful, but God is. And so one of the things I like to do is just pray with people, and whatever happens is going to happen. I have no control over it, but what I do believe is that everybody can have that light turned back on. If it's been closed, it can be turned back on. And that light is that love source connection that we all have. So that's really what I want to say today. And that's why I wrote the title of Waking Up to Love. Someone told me, well, you need to make this a little peppier, Missy. Say something like, we met on the other side, which, yeah, we did. And that alone is unusual. That's the shared near-death experience. The thing about that, I didn't even know that term back in 2005. Raymond Moody came out with it later, I think in his book when it was published in 2006 or 2010, whatever. And I was like, oh, that's what happened. I didn't have a word for it. I just figured I'm out of my body, he's dying, he's getting ready to cross over, and we're somehow meeting there. But it didn't occur to me that that was a thing. I didn't know. So, you know, when all these things happened at that time, I just didn't even know how to process it. But here we are today, and like I said, the most important thing I want to share with you again is the reminder of what I've learned. And I do want to say this too, I have gone on and worked with other people who have also been in catastrophic situations and have had some pretty stunning results, also using the same method. So I think I've learned some things also that are scientifically based. And part of those things that I've learned have been the power of the spoken word. In the book, I put detailed the words I chose when I talked to David. I talked to his organs because I felt that they have a life and energy of their own and could hear it. And, you know, this is not that different from affirmative prayer, medical hypnosis. You can't imagine a better person in a state to be receiving as someone who's unconscious, right? And so hypnosis is all part of that. So I studied hypnosis too. And I studied neurolinguistic programming, which is a way of reframing things, because a lot of people are carrying huge amounts of trauma in their bodies, you know, issues in the tissues. So when I talk to people, I help them to understand that their physical body is one body, but they have a mental body that has an energy field, they have a spirit body that has an energy field, and they have an emotional body that has an energy field, and I will tell you that every one of those is vibrating at a different level. So part of the work that I do is help to integrate that whole body, and to integrate those elements together and kind of drop them in to the physical body, just kind of like David's kidneys dropped into his. Now it sounds a little unusual, except that it's, as an energy healer, those are the things that I've worked with and felt. And I'll tell you too, one of the other things that we talk about our fingerprints being unique. Your soul print is unique. Every single one of you has a different energy field. And so part of the work that I have learned how to do is to feel your feeling and your print. One of the ways I do that is, like when I worked with David, I adjusted my breathing to the ventilator. I harmonized with him. I don't know if you've heard of the Heart Math Institute, but they do a lot of work in this. So that meant that my heart rate began to beat like his. And so that's part of what I do when I'm working with somebody. We breathe together. I begin to feel where they are. I begin to organize together. We're in a partnership. We're in a healing partnership together, and I call that a sacred trust. And that element there is, you know, the most amazing thing that happens when we're working together. That's that third force field. I call it like the triple helix. We're wound up together, and there's something beautiful taking place. So these are some of the things that happen when I'm working with people, and I firmly believe that everything I have learned is teachable. And another thing I try to tell people, unless they've been chronically ill their entire life, is you know, your body has a soul and physical memory, an imprint. And so I try to remind people of a time when they felt their very best in every way, and to remember that, because you're reclaiming your divine birthright, which is to be healthy and whole and feel your best. Now, none of us are going to escape the effects of aging. None of us are going to escape the things in these environments that impact our health, and we're all going to have our final physical death at some point. But we've had a taste of something that is divine, and I personally believe if we've had that experience, if we've had that exposure, that there is something practical that we can do to help others on this journey to make their life better, to help them heal and ease the suffering. Because that to me is the most important thing. That's my calling, is to help ease suffering. That's really what I want to do. It's a comforter. It's being a comforter. And finding ways that can do that. It's also, you know, looking at the love piece. I said I didn't know I wasn't normal when I was having all of these experiences as a young child. Like I said, seeing deceased relatives, having unusual experiences, just knowing things. I knew my grandfather was going to die to the minute and the day. I just knew what time. And I told my mom so we could all gather around, and he did. He died right at the time that I said he would. And then the horn went off in his car. And that might be my next book, Noisy Exits. I had an uncle who passed away, and then all of my smoke alarms went off at one time. So, you know, so we've had a lot of that too. But again, I'm used to being in this other realm, and I just didn't know it was unusual until it began to really piece in more and more. That said, I still feel that people have these abilities and that they can be developed and taught, and I have taught developing intuition, so that's all part of it too. So I'm putting together, like I said, the teaching curriculum, because I think that's where it's at. There's so much need, so much going on for everybody, that if the more people I can show what I do and how I put these things together, I think that's going to make the huge difference in taking things to the next level in terms of healing, using energy, integrating things that we know are useful. And it's how you put it together that makes a difference. So that's what I'm working toward now. And to me, that's going to be the love offering I leave this world when I finally go. And that's what I would like to be known for. Not to be a famous author or this or that, but to be someone who shared what I learned from this gift that I got with others, so that I can leave this world a better place than how I came into it. So that's all I've got. Thank you.